Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Ooh, it's a little loud. I might have to turn it down. I'm Connie Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, and this is Crossroads Luncheon, a monthly luncheon that we hold. And we really talk about just a variety of subjects and always have an expert with us on those subjects. So if you're new to us, a special welcome. And for everyone, glad you are here to be part of this conversation. We're going to be talking about food insecurity. And in the emails that you received, there were some questions. Who's responsible for ensuring all people have enough food? What is the best way to ensure no child goes hungry? And what is Iowa's responsibility, especially as a state with abundance of resources and revenues, to ensure that all of our people have enough food, particularly our children? So I am grateful to Luke Ozinga, who is with us today. Luke is the Policy and Advocacy Manager of DMARC, directing DMARC's advocacy efforts on the nutrition and anti-poverty programs on the local, state, and national level. Luke earned his BA from Iowa State University. He previously served as an AmeriCorps Vista member at Montana Legal Services Association in Helena, Montana. Luke is a fellow of the New Leaders Council Des Moines chapter and is currently a Health Connect fellow with Mid-Iowa Health Foundation. He serves on the board of the Iowa Hunger Coalition and has previously served on the board of the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network. And so, Luke, we welcome you and thank you so much for all of your work and for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Is everyone hearing me okay? Is that sounding good? All right, well, I see a lot of familiar faces in the room, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Luke Elsinga. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Manager at DMARC, and I've been with DMARC for over 10 years. So a little bit about me. I've worked at DMARC since April of 2014, and I started off as DMARC's Communications Manager. And my role has kind of shifted over the years. I now work full-time as our Policy and Advocacy Manager, and I'll talk a little bit about how we got more involved in advocacy work. I'm passionate about storytelling, data, and anti-hunger advocacy. I did get my BA through Iowa State and my Master's of Public Policy through UNI, and I am a husband and a father. So for those of you who are not familiar with DMARC, the Des Moines Area Religious Council, or DMARC, has been around since 1952. We are built on a foundation of interfaith work. We started off as the Des Moines Area Council of Churches in 1952. We became interfaith in the 70s. Most people are familiar with our work through our food pantry network, which has been active since 1976. So we are approaching our 50-year anniversary of the DMARC Food Pantry Network in 2026. But our work is really centered on working together to meet basic human needs for the greater Des Moines community. And most of our work is through that food pantry network. We also do some interfaith outreach and education efforts. That top photo is a photo from our annual Interfaith Youth Leadership Camp. We partner with Interfaith Alliance of Iowa and some other groups on the Meet My Religious Neighbor events and try to do some of that interfaith engagement work. And then another piece of our work, which is what I do, is our policy advocacy and coalition building work. The DMARC Food Pantry Network has 14 different partner food pantries around the metro. We have a mobile food pantry program, and we also have a home delivery program. Our food pantries are choice food pantries, meaning people are selecting the food items when they go to the pantry. We have both monthly and anytime items. So the monthly items are kind of some of those staple food items. They're there, same food items every month when people come to visit. It's based on household size. And then anytime items are ones that you can come any day. And I'm sorry, I stole some of these from our Facebook page and you all just were by, so I think you show up in the next slide too. But really, rely on a lot of our congregations, companies. Our primary source of support is actually just individuals in our community. But a lot of those individuals have come to know our work through their congregations. And we also have a focus on providing healthy food items. So we try to do a lot of fresh produce, but for then those non-perishable food items, items that are canned in 100% juice rather than heavy syrup, those sort of things. Our food comes from wholesale purchases, food rescue and recovery. We do get a chunk of our food from Food Bank of Iowa. We have food drives and donations, and we have Giving and Faith Gardens that donate fresh produce to us as well. So a little bit about the trends we've been seeing at our food pantries. In August, we assisted over 27,000 unique individuals through our network of 14 pantries, including over 2,000 first-time food pantry visitors. This July, in July of 2024, we set our all-time record for our busiest month, and we assisted over 28,000 unique individuals. We also set another record recently, just at the start of this month, September 3rd. We assisted over 2,000 unique individuals. That was our single busiest day that we've seen in our network's history. And I'll get into this in a little bit, but we've really been seeing increases going back to April of 2022. And we have steadily seen these increases, including in the number of first-time food pantry visitors. We keep thinking that number's got to plateau at some point. There's only so many people who could be turning to us for service, but we consistently see around 2,000 new individuals every month. And obviously we see some people who don't need to use our services anymore, so it's not like it's constantly building, but we do continue, unfortunately, to break those records. So how does government policy impact DMARC's mission and our numbers? Just want to briefly share some kind of 101 basics of SNAP. So if you're not familiar, SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, it's our nation's largest anti-hunger program, formerly known as food stamps. People get benefits loaded onto an EBT card. Those benefit amounts vary based on the income the household has. There's about 266,000 individuals right now in Iowa who benefit, and the average monthly household benefit is $323 per household. When you break that down to a cost per meal per individual, it's $1.76. So this graph has a lot going on, so we'll try to take it one piece at a time. If you can focus your attention on that light blue line first, this is the number of unique individuals assisted every month by DMARC, and it starts at the start of 2019. So you can see in 2019, we were actually breaking records. And you'll see some kind of annual trends. Those spikes are November. November is always the busiest month at our food pantries. It's just a really high need time. There's also pantries that will offer, Thanksgiving boxes, or there's some other resources that people can access at that time. But if you'll notice, in the start of 2020, when the pandemic hit, we actually saw our numbers at our food pantries go down. And that wasn't because there was less need. It's because there were additional programs and supports at that time. So that green line you'll see is the average, or I think it's the total SNAP benefits for Polk County. So in April of 2020, maximum benefits for SNAP kicked in. So if you were previously receiving the minimum benefit of $20 a month, your benefits went from $20 to $250 that month. When those maximum benefits kicked in, our numbers saw a pretty precipitous drop. And again, it's not that there was less need. There was more need out there, but in addition to those SNAP emergency allotments, you had things like the enhanced child tax credit monthly payments that were going out at certain times. You had stimulus checks, you had rent assistance. Everyone was receiving free school meals, so there were a lot of additional supports. And there were a number of new community supports that popped up. New groups doing food access, opening, food pantries or little free pantries or community fridges. So there were more resources for folks. But what we said at that time was, you know, we're really concerned about what happens when these temporary benefits go away, because the need has only gotten worse. And that's what we saw in April of 2022. That's when maximum allotments for SNAP went away in the state of Iowa. And you can see on the graph pretty quickly, our numbers shot right back up. And they've been continuing to increase since then. So this is one very clear example of how government policy impacts DMARC and the people we assist. When families have more adequate support, they're able to meet their household needs. They have less reliance on food pantries. When people have more money to spend at the grocery store, they don't need to use food pantries as often. And that seems very basic, but we see that in our numbers, and it's not always the narrative that's presented sometimes. So we have those SNAP emergency allotments, pandemic EBT. When those went out, this was during the pandemic, some additional benefits for households with children as they were out of school. Our numbers dropped in terms of the number of children we were seeing at the pantry that month. So we have some very clear examples. We also have some examples when benefits are cut or programs become more difficult to access, that we see the direct result at food pantries. So going back to 2013, following the Great Recession, there was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. In 2013, it had, you know, put in some temporary increases to SNAP, but those went away. We started seeing 20% increases in use at our food pantries. It's one of the reasons we started getting more involved in advocacy, because we directly saw when these SNAP benefits were cut, we were starting to see more people at our food pantries, and it was frankly having a financial impact for us as an organization. Another clear example we have is the government shutdown of January 2019. SNAP benefits went out early, so people got their February benefits in January. Along with their January benefits, we saw a huge drop in people using the pantry that month, but then a big increase in February. So we have these concrete examples when to show how SNAP benefits impact our work. Another thing I will mention, a record we have been breaking, kind of on the other side of things, is we have been breaking records for the lowest percentage of the people we're assisting actually enrolled in SNAP. So while 95% of the people we assist are income eligible, only 35% of everyone we assist is actually benefiting from SNAP. And we have seen that change pretty dramatically over the years. So when I started at DMARC, you know, 10 years ago, it was about 60% of everyone we were assisting were using SNAP. Now this graph here, it only goes back to January of 2020. But what you're looking at is kind of almost a Venn diagram, but the overlap between people who are receiving only SNAP and are using DMARC, or are just using DMARC. And the way we got these numbers is looking at the percentage of people who were visiting DMARC and saying, yes, I'm receiving food stamps, and then kind of mapping that out with the total number of people in Polk County. But you can see start of January 2020 is when we hit a milestone of that 50%. 50% of the people we were assisting were receiving SNAP, 50% were not. So again, before this, it had been kind of steadily ticking down. But comparing January 2020 to August of 2024, where we're at now, you can see that SNAP is assisting less people, DMARC is assisting more. So, you know, we assisted 28,000 people in July. There were, you know, 41,000. And I want to make this case too to show that SNAP is obviously still assisting a lot more people than we are, and does a lot more than DMARC has the capacity to do. You know, SNAP issues $9 million in benefits just here in Polk County every month. That's triple our annual operating budget, which is why it's so important that we advocate for this program to be accessible for Iowans, because we know private charity can't do it alone. You know, we need government to be there too. And this gets into some of why and how we advocate. So as we're breaking records, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but SNAP is actually at a 16-year low in Iowa. It's about the same in Polk County. I have some guesses as to why that is and some research that we can point to. But just knowing those two facts, that tells us, I think, something is very wrong. This is the enrollment for SNAP going back to February of 2003. So you can see, we kind of peaked at enrollment during the Great Recession. There was a little spike during the pandemic, but we're basically sitting at a plateau right now, and our numbers are comparable to July 2008. If you'd like to learn more about kind of SNAP enrollment, you can look at county level. I would direct you to the Iowa Hunger Coalition SNAP map, and you can look at all the latest data there. So why does DMARC advocate? Well, A, if we're serious about ending hunger and food insecurity in our community, that does not just mean serving more and more food to more people in need. It means actually advocating to shorten the line at food pantries and get at some of those root cause issues that are leading people to turn to food pantries. And that requires advocating for policy change with our elected officials. So we primarily engage in advocacy around SNAP, WIC, school meal programs. We do some work of kind of root cause issues of poverty. We've done some housing, childcare, wage advocacy. And I will also add that when we see more people turning to DMARC because of these systemic failures, that has a financial impact on our organization. Not just the community members turning to us for assistance. That means we're needing to raise more money. We're asking for more money from our community and donors. And that's kind of shifting the responsibility. Not that we shouldn't be doing this work. Absolutely, food pantries are necessary to exist. But what we're seeing is kind of a shift away from government toward more private charities and those sorts of supports. How we advocate, we engage in advocacy with elected officials, state agencies, candidates for office. I serve as DMARC's registered lobbyist, so during the session, I'm up there testifying at subcommittee meetings, talking with legislators about our stance on bills, asking people to vote no on legislation, asking people to vote yes on legislation. Grassroots advocacy, so engaging grassroots advocates, our pantry partners, our faith community partners around taking action on legislation, not just at the state level, but also the federal level. Data and storytelling. We pride ourselves on our data, but also on our storytelling work. I think both are really important. I think it's really good to have both. You don't really want one without the other. The data is really important to show the kind of systemic issues, that hunger touches all parts of our community. But it's also really important to have those stories, to have people share their lived experience with legislators, because I think a lot of the times that's missing in those, especially in those subcommittee meetings and places like that. A big part of our work is coalition building too. DMARC, we serve primarily Polk County, the Des Moines metro area. But we know that state level policy that's being made in Des Moines impacts not only us, but other pantries across the state. And a lot of the time, the legislators whose minds we need to change aren't necessarily the ones who are living in Des Moines. So we do a lot of coalition building to work with other pantries and other advocates from across the state to have that kind of unified voice. And that's a lot of the work we do with the Iowa Hunger Coalition, as well as the Iowa Food System Coalition and some other kind of issue-based coalitions. So one thing I wanted to share about today, if you read the description of my presentation, was talking about another really, I think, concrete example of decisions made by our elected officials and how policy has impacted our numbers. So I want to talk about Iowa's decision on Summer EBT or Sunbucks, both for this summer and for next year and going forward. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Summer EBT or Sunbucks, this was a new program created by Congress in 2022. It's the first new childhood nutrition program we've had at the federal level in 20 years. It provides some additional grocery benefits during the summer for kids who qualify for free and reduced price lunches. So it's meant to complement our summer meal programs that we have and provide a little bit of additional resources for children and their families during the summer. It actually started through demonstration projects in 2011. So this is something that USDA has been looking at for, over 10 years. So there were actually 3 different phases of Summer EBT demonstration projects looking at how can we better address childhood food insecurity during the summer when kids are out of school. In 2020, some of you may be familiar with pandemic EBT. Those were cards that went out. This was kind of modeled off of the Summer EBT demonstration programs. During the pandemic, they said, okay, kids are out of school. How do we provide them some extra support? We had done this demonstration project looking at what it looked like to provide an EBT card with some additional benefits. So Congress looked at that as a way. And so I think one thing I want to clear up a bit is when Summer EBT was made permanent, there was a lot of media about, oh, we're making this pandemic era, program permanent. In a way that's true, but there's also some differences. And this was, kind of built off of the demonstration projects that we had going back to 2011. So this was made permanent by Congress, bipartisan act in December of 2022. States have to opt in. Real quick, sorry, I should have gone through my slides better ahead of time. Just talking about some of the evidence on Summer EBT. We know from these demonstration projects, because they were heavily studied, that when we provide kids with some additional dollars during the summer to buy groceries, we see an increase in whole grain and dairy consumption, fruit and vegetable consumption, an actual decrease in sugar sweetened beverage consumption, and a pretty significant decrease in childhood food insecurity. Based on the state's own estimates for 2024, Summer EBT would have assisted almost 250,000 kids, so about 245,000 children across the state. Each eligible child would receive $40 in benefits for 3 months during the summer, so $120 in benefits per eligible child, and that would be a total of $29 million in benefits, and those are fully federally funded. Like SNAP, the benefits themselves are entirely funded by the federal government, but the state does have a 50-50 cost share on the administrative costs. Iowa projected that the state's share was going to be $2.2 million. So it would have cost us $2.2 million to get $29 million in benefits. So this was, over a year ago at this point, but states had to opt into the program and had a deadline of January 1st to participate. And so we had been meeting behind the scenes with the governor's office, with the Department of Education, HHS, to encourage the state to participate leading up to that deadline. And they had been reluctant. Actually, with even the final round of pandemic EBT that went out, the state initially said, we're not going to do it. We put some public pressure on, they reversed course. And so our thought was, let's try to meet behind the scenes, give the state a win that we could all celebrate. Unfortunately, that is not what happened. So on Friday, December 22, this was at like 4:30 p.m., I will add too, on a Friday before Christmas. The state put out an announcement that we would not be participating in Summer EBT in 2024. I have a couple quotes here around justification. An EBT card does nothing to promote childhood nutrition at a time when childhood obesity has become an epidemic. That was a quote from the governor in the release. And from Director Kelly Garcia, Summer EBT fails to address the barriers that exist to healthy and nutritional foods. Now, we had shared the evidence with their offices. I will say that. And they have yet to respond when we've asked them, what are you basing this off of? We have research that shows, and they don't want to engage for, I think, obvious reasons, because the research is not on their side. But they did say, we're going to enhance existing childhood nutrition programs. So we were kind of saying, okay, let's see, wait and see. But at that time, in January, we really shifted our focus to the legislature to try and get them to direct the state to participate. So we did a number of different things. We had an organizational sign-on letter. We launched a petition. We held a rally for Summer EBT that this photo is from. We were really trying to engage in efforts to find bipartisan champions. I mean, Iowa's a Republican trifecta. We really needed a Republican to sponsor something for it to have any chance to pass during the legislative session. And while we did have Democrats introduce a number of bills, we could not find a Republican to sign on to a bill. And honestly, I think the governor's comments were the biggest barrier there. I had conversations with Republican legislators who were not pleased about the decision, think we should be participating, but were not willing to stick their neck out and sponsor that bill. So, like I said, the governor's office said we're going to do something. In April, Iowa announced the Summer Meal Expansion Grant Program, which directed $900,000 in ARPA funds to expand summer meal sites, which I think is a good thing. Still not Summer EBT. And so this grant did launch 61 new sites. What the governor's office repeatedly fails to say about this program is there were dozens of other sites that did close throughout the state. So we actually only saw a net gain of 21 sites in 2024 compared to 2023. And we're still waiting on final numbers, but based on the numbers the state has put out so far, we guess that about 13% of students who qualify for Sunbucks were served by summer meal sites in 2024. Now that's up from about 11% in 2023, so I guess we can pat ourselves on the back about that. But still, again, there's a lot of barriers that exist to these summer meal sites that were not addressed by the grant that I think Summer EBT is meant to fill those gaps. And the impact of not having Summer EBT this summer, well, we had nearly 250,000 kids go without those $120 in nutrition benefits. Again, not a huge amount, $40 a month per kid. But it can make a real difference to families to help put food on the table while those kids are out of school and not able to access free and reduced price meals like they could during the school year. July was our busiest month at the DMARC Food Pantry Network, and we assisted over 10,000 children. About 36% of the people we assist on a given month are children. And I want to note that this trend of rising food pantry use is not exclusive to the Des Moines Metro. So we know through our work with the Hunger Coalition and talking with other pantries that these are very similar trends across the state, whether you are in an urban area, a suburban area, or a rural area. So I guess the real question and what I've been working on is how do we get the governor to change her mind on Summer EBT for 2025? We had been organizing around an August 15th USDA deadline. I won't get too far into the specifics, but it was trying to get the state to submit a plan for operation so that we could start drawing down those matching funds from the federal government for administration to make sure we were getting the state set up for success in 2025. So we were doing some organizing around that with the governor's office and HHS. We launched a new petition, had over 4,000 people sign it. I'm sure some of you in this room signed that. Delivered that to the governor's office. I see John with American Friends Service Committee dropping off our petition there with Ann from Common Good, Iowa. So I think that also helped just generate additional media, public awareness about this. We met with HHS, the governor's office. Again, we also really reached out to a lot of different groups to say, hey, can you make contact? Even if you're not willing to say something publicly, meet with the governor and talk about the importance of this program. Delivered that petition. On August 15th, the governor announced we once again would not be participating, would be requesting this waiver to operate a summer meal box program, which unfortunately I just only really have questions and not a ton of answers about. But the USDA did respond that same day, and I was kind of surprised at some of the language they used in their response, which was pretty forceful for the USDA. And, you know, they said through this waiver request, the governor's asserting that the state knows better than its own families do about what their needs are. And that's one thing that we've been, you know, calling the governor out on too. And so where things stand now, USDA does not consider Iowa's waiver request to be summer EBT. They've made that pretty clear, but they've said, frankly, they don't have the authority. I mean, Iowa's asking to waive 29 different pieces of federal code and basically just say, we'd like the money, but we don't want to follow any of the law. And it's been clear that they would have liked this to be a block grant from the start, and I think that's basically what they're asking for here. But USDA just does not have the authority to do that. But they have said they're going to look at this through a separate demonstration project channel. We're waiting to hear on the USDA's decision on the box program. I don't think it's very likely. We had a demonstration project in 2011 and 3 rounds of it about this issue, and it's where we got to summer EBT. So I don't think it's very likely, but we're just kind of waiting and seeing. Couple things I want to note from the governor's kind of announcement that I think were kind of favorable. She recognized publicly in that announcement that Iowa's food banks and pantries are facing this really historic need, and also that a lot of people facing food insecurity aren't currently being assisted by programs like SNAP. And so in her box program, she proposed, we're going to increase the income eligibility to 200%. Summer EBT is 185% of the federal poverty level. And so, you know, she was saying this is going to serve more kids. Well, it just so happens we've been advocating to raise income eligibility for SNAP to 200% for a few years. So we see this as an opportunity to, you know, governors recognizing that there's a lot of people who aren't currently assisted, make a little too much to qualify. Let's raise the income eligibility for SNAP up from 160 to 200%. So next steps for us, regardless of the USDA's decision, I mean, even if they approve this box program, Iowa could still participate in summer EBT, and we should. And so there's a notice of intent due January 1st. This is a harder deadline that the state needs to meet. We're going to be organizing around that. We are on Monday launching a kind of candidate tool. The Iowa Hunger Coalition is. They've asked all candidates for Iowa House and Senate where they stand on summer EBT. So that will be going live on Monday. We're organizing another organizational sign-on letter. We're doing additional outreach and coalition building, and summer EBT is going to be another top legislative priority. Even if the governor says, yes, we're going to participate in 2025, it's still going to be a top priority for us, making sure that the state has that in its admin budget and making sure there's enough dollars allocated there. So I know I'm a little bit over on time, but I will open it up to questions now. And I think Connie's going to be running around the room with a microphone. So I'll let her.
It's my job to get my steps today. So it is our habit for Crossroads, if you would raise your hand and I will bring the microphone to you. Don't talk unless you have a microphone in your hand, and I will make my way that way as well.
So Luke, how is that information going to be sent to the candidates so that they know that it's out there? And then what are we able to do with that once they respond to that?
So I'm going to take off my DMARC hat and put on my Iowa Hunger Coalition hat. And so I serve as the board chair of the Iowa Hunger Coalition. So the Hunger Coalition sent out a question, it would have been 3 weeks ago today, to all House and Senate candidates, just asking, do you support summer EBT in Iowa? We wanted to keep it really short. And so we've sent out a number of reminders. At this point, I think we have over 80 candidate responses. That's out of like 215 total candidates. And so those will be posted online on the Iowa Hunger Coalition website. And it's essentially just there's a map with districts that you can click on to bring up district-specific answers, or it's just a table of responses. So IHC doesn't endorse candidates. It's just kind of, here's the responses we got about do you support Summer EBT in Iowa? So, and we'll send that out to all the candidates on Monday, letting them know it's live, but we'll also send it out through IHC's communications for the general public to take a look at. And we hope that some candidates may also continue to respond if, you know, we put it out there and you live in a district that a candidate didn't respond, feel free to email them and say, hey, I'd really like to know where you stand on this. Maybe you can respond to this, and we'll add those as we receive them.
Hi, Sunbucks. The children don't get this themselves. This is it either added to their parents' EBT, or because there were comments about, oh, they'll just use it for junk food and that sort of thing. But it goes to the parents and not to the children.
It does. It goes to the parents. Your question about how it's kind of distributed. For those children who are in a household that participates in SNAP already, the state could choose to load those benefits on that existing card. They don't need, some states are doing that. Others are sending out a separate Summer EBT card, like they did with Pandemic EBT. I will say a key difference between Pandemic EBT and Summer EBT is, for instance, if you lived in a district that provided free school meals to everyone through the community eligibility provision, during the pandemic, everyone got those cards. So we had some parents who were saying, I don't really need this money, what do I do with it? They fixed that when they passed it in Congress, so now it's only the kids who qualify. But that card would get sent out to that household. So it would be a separate card. And for those households already participating in SNAP, the state could load it on or they'd send it out. And yes, technically, I mean, the kid's name is the one on the card, but I'm assuming in most instances it would be a parent or other caregiver that's going to the store and buying the food. And so, and this is getting into the weeds a bit, but the state could either issue every child a separate card, or they could issue one card for the entire household. We think it would be easier to just issue one card for the entire household. I will also say their math on the administrative costs. Am I cutting out? Okay. I have a couple questions on, because the way they projected those costs was, we're gonna send one card out per child, and it costs at $6 per card. So if we actually combined kids in the same households and loaded it onto SNAP cards, we could shave off a few $100,000 of those admin costs too.
So I was going to ask, why did the participation in the SNAP program go down? You said you had a few ideas on that.
Yeah, I have some guesses, and I wish I had more concrete answers, but I mean, anecdotally, when I've talked to folks at the pantry who don't participate, there are some folks who maybe make a little too much to qualify for benefits. But again, most of the people we assist, that's not the case. For some people, if they only qualify for the minimum benefit, which is $23 a month for the household, they might just say, it's not really worth my time. And so we have some people who maybe apply, get benefits for 6 months, and then when it comes to that recertification period, they're just like, nah, not worth my time. I'm not gonna reapply for benefits. I just requested some data and got some data from the state on the average amount of time that people spend on SNAP in Polk County, and there's a pretty significant cutoff right after that 6 months. So what we think is happening is a lot of people are participating, losing access at the 6 months, and either, you know, not recertifying or falling off benefits and reapplying. But I think that's part of it. Anecdotally too, I will share, especially among seniors, there's some misinformation of, if I participate, someone else is going to go without. And so there's some education to be done about, well, that's not how the program works. You know, I always say, if you paid taxes your whole life, you know, this is what the program is here for, is to help our people when they're in need. So I think there is some misinformation. I think stigma's still a huge piece of it. I mean, food pantries too. There's things we've done to reduce stigma. with the SNAP program, but I still think it exists. And I think, and there's research to back this up, but I think that the political narratives advanced by our state leaders have an effect on program stigma, which drives down participation. So especially if you're a low-income Iowan living maybe in an area of the state that's more red, everyone in your community might be more visible. If you're using an EBT card at the grocery store, you hear things being shared about those people who use SNAP. I think that those public narratives can definitely impact the amount of stigma that people feel and internalize, and can affect their decision on whether they are going to participate in SNAP or not. There's one study that found that basically the negative mental health effects that come from program stigma can negate any positive physical health improvements from improved nutrition. So like the stigma we are intentionally creating for the program is negating any positive effect that it could have from and again, that's just one study, but I think it's really fascinating. And I think that stigma is a huge piece of why our enrollment is so low. I also think just program complexity is another piece of this. The application's 16 pages long, the recertification process is 12 pages long, and I'm exaggerating a little bit because those last 2 pages are like the civil rights, declaration. You only have to fill out 14, I think. But, for a lot of people that they may not feel comfortable, that they may struggle with that. Things come up, people change addresses, they miss a piece of mail and lose access to benefits and then don't go back on. So I wish I had like a concrete, here is why. But I think it's a multitude of factors.
I have a similar kind of question. I want to know if you've noticed any relationship between the increase in immigrant rhetoric and the drop of people who are willing to sign up for EBTs.
That is a great question. We do have some evidence looking at, because USDA puts out numbers for SNAP on non-citizens. There's certain non-citizens who can qualify for SNAP if they're a refugee. Citizen children of non-citizens can qualify. We have some evidence over the years. A few years back during the Trump administration, there was this public charge rule. I don't know if people remember that, but it was basically saying if you've ever been a public charge, meaning you've relied on SNAP or some other form of government benefits, that may impact your ability to become a citizen in the future. And there was a lot of fear out there of immigrant communities of, even if my kid who's a citizen qualifies for SNAP, I don't want to apply. Like, I don't want to put my name on that application. And so we certainly during that time saw the number of non-citizens participating in SNAP in Iowa go down pretty dramatically. That rule change was reversed under the Biden administration. And we've seen some of those numbers come up since then, but they're still not at the levels they were. I think that fear still exists. I think one thing that's really harmful about that public charge rule, the first proposal was that it was going to be retroactive, meaning if at any point you benefited. And so the fact that we have the same person running for president who has proposed a retroactive rule like that in the past, I think even when the Biden administration is saying, hey, we want to instill more public trust, this is not going to affect your benefits, there's still some fear that's out there. And I don't blame people for having that fear at all.
One of the problems I have is trying to understand the governor's thinking process. The inconsistency of her philosophy when she talks about vouchers and parent rights, when she talks about books and parent rights, but she talks about EBTs and parents don't have the right to make those decisions. So how do we help where we may not agree with her on those other philosophies, but in this case, she's missed the mark And parents do have a right in order to determine how to feed their children. Because the process where they have to go someplace and pick up food, where it may not be convenient, they may not have the ability during the summer to go pick up that food. Not everybody has the transportation. Not everybody can go off work and go pick up that food at a certain time to pick up the food. The governor is not in a real world situation to understand those things. But in an EBT card, the family can plan and buy the food to feed the family during the summer. That's a totally different situation, parent rights, than in those other scenarios where the government believes that parents are the best source to make those decisions.
Yes, you are exactly right. And I mean, what we don't know about that box program is, would people be able to customize, for food allergies or, other dietary restrictions based on, religion or medical needs? I mean, it's a big question mark, but you're absolutely right. And I mean, since that announcement back in December of 2023, we have been very much trying to amplify the hypocrisy that you noted. And we believe that parents should be trusted to make the best food choices for their family. And when we're talking about parental choice and these other issues, you are right. It seems like there's a different standard when it comes to sending kids to private schools versus feeding low-income children. Yes, yeah.
Luke, I just want to thank you so much for your work and your leadership. It's been tremendous, and thanks for the presentation today. I wondered if you could, let's give Luke a thank you. Congress currently looking at the Farm Bill, and also certainly House Republicans looking at really super deep cuts in SNAP benefits there. Can you talk, what can we do to influence that process?
Great question, John. And yes, for those of you who don't know, SNAP is a huge piece of the Farm Bill. I mean, in terms of dollars, it's the biggest piece of the Farm Bill. Farm Bill is up for reauthorization. We're supposed to have something passed by September 30. We were actually supposed to have something passed by September 30 last year for the Farm Bill, but they extended it, which is why we're at where we are now. There's currently the budget battle over appropriation bills happening that they've got to pass by the 30th. From what I heard is, and this is just me like reading email newsletters, but is that there probably won't be a Farm Bill passed by the 30th. Now that doesn't mean that programs are going to start expiring overnight. They need to get something passed in December. But from what I've heard, the Farm Bill is not included in some of these spending bills. Now that could change. I mean, with our Congress, like that could literally change overnight. I could be sharing wrong information right now. But you are right that the House version of the Farm Bill includes a $30 billion cut to SNAP. And these are future benefits. So they have been, House Republicans have been saying, we're not cutting anything. But when you are removing $30 billion from future benefits, that sounds like a cut to me. And so it would be $170 million for Iowa. And again, these are future benefits. So this essentially means 10 years down the road, someone would not be facing an increase of, I think it's between $15 and $18, which again, not a huge amount, but when you add that up over the year, that's over $100 people would not be receiving in SNAP benefits. And it goes really into the weeds with this thrifty food plan modernization piece. There's a lot of back and forth. But I think the important thing to know is just, we're fighting for a bipartisan Farm Bill that improves SNAP and does not cut it.
Urban gardens have been in the news this week, and especially the idea of the city developing policies and plans regarding urban gardens. I feel very unknowledgeable about what urban gardens are and if they will help with food insecurity in our community. I don't know, do you want to just comment on that?
Well, I will share that I am also not an expert on urban gardens, and I'm not as keyed into some of the policy discussions at the local level as I probably should be. I think it's an important piece. I think urban gardens are a really important piece, especially as we think about our local food system. I don't think they're going to solve food insecurity. You know, I don't think we are going to create enough backyard urban giving gardens to solve food insecurity outright. I think the issue we have in the United States is not that there's not enough food to feed people. It's that people can't afford that food. So I definitely think urban gardening can be a part of that, and helping people have a space to grow their own food, you know, free of cost. But I think it's a piece of the puzzle. I don't think it's just like Summer EBT is a piece of the puzzle. I mean, if we get Summer EBT, it's not like food insecurity is going to evaporate in Iowa overnight. It's a piece of the puzzle, and it takes, you know, it's an incredibly complex issue, and it takes, you know, nonprofits, government, churches, faith communities, other civic groups all working together through a variety of ways. And I think I think urban gardening is a really important piece of that.
Thanks, Luke. Probably a simple question. You've mentioned a couple times 185% of poverty level or 200% of poverty level. Can you tell us what poverty level is?
Yes, I should know this off the top of my head.
I mean, I know it's single and two-person and four-person, but some idea, we get something in our mind about what that might be.
Yeah, and I should have had the table up because sometimes I do. I mean, it is not much. I think for a single person, poverty is below 20,000 annually. So I want to say it's like around 17. Does someone have it up?
Yeah, I got
So I'm not. So 15,000 is poverty for a single individual.
For 4 people, it's 31,000.
31,000 for a family of 4. So you could do the math. That 31 times 1.85 would get you, you know, what that income guideline is. But it is not very high. I mean, 160% for SNAP. There are a lot of people who experience food insecurity and visit food pantries who make over 160%, and it's not enough to get by. One thing that we will point to a lot is the United Way's ALICE report, which kind of looks at cost of living. And I don't think there is a single county in the state of Iowa where the survival household budget for those ALICE numbers is below 200,000. I could be wrong, but I don't think there is.
So I'm interested in knowing or have a question about how much of the federal government allocations are given to the United States as opposed to food insecurities within the world.
I would need to look. So our comparison of federal spending on international versus domestic, that's a really good question. I'm not sure how the proportion breaks out for that. I know we do spend a lot more on domestic, but I'm just not sure what the dollar amounts or percentages would be. We do have a number of international hunger relief programs that I am not as well versed in. I would say there's other groups that do a lot more in that realm. Bread for the World is one I've worked with most closely that does a lot around international hunger relief and advocacy there. But I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head. Great question. Yeah. Hey.
Thank you, Luke. This has been very helpful. I have a comment and a question. The comment is the other thing about people being able to buy their own food besides allergies and disabilities, that type of thing, is that we have a huge diversity of ethnicity, and they have different food ways of cooking a nutritious meal for their family that can't be taken into consideration
Yep.
with the boxed meal.
Mhm.
But then something we never talk about, and maybe because it is just so impossible to happen that we don't bother talking about it. But we spend all of our time talking about how are we going to feed all the hungry people instead of saying, how can we have fewer hungry people?
Yeah.
And the thing is, we have to raise the minimum wage to be a basic living wage where you can buy your own food.
Yep.
When are we gonna start dealing with that?
Great question. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, even SNAP is a form of a Band-Aid. You know, it's helping people. Obviously, an incredibly important program to make sure people are fed. But, you know, how do we get to those root causes? And I think wages are a huge piece of that. You know, I forget how many years ago it was. Maybe Connie can remind me. But Polk County did raise the minimum wage, and we did some work on that. And then the state came back and passed a preemption. And this has happened not only with minimum wage, but lawful source of income for housing, some other pieces where, you know, we're not seeing progress at the state level. And so counties or cities are taking it upon themselves. And then the state is coming back and saying, no, you can't do that. I don't know the best way forward that I can answer in a nonpartisan way, I will say. So, I mean, I don't see the state of Iowa passing a minimum wage increase next year, unfortunately, but it is certainly something that we would support. I think there's a lot of groups that would support that and would do work on that, but just with our current political environment, some of these bad SNAP bills we've been fighting at the legislature, there's 3 groups in favor of them. And we've got like 60, 80 groups, Iowa-based groups registered against them. And clearly we are outnumbering them, but that's not how the votes go, you know.
One of the ways that you receive your food is purchasing through wholesalers. For smaller pantries and food closets, can they come to DMARC and purchase from you and have access to these wholesalers that you have?
So for the partner pantries within our network, we do all the purchasing. And then we do work with some other partners on those kind of bulk purchases to help bring down the costs. I'm not sure what the process is of like getting keyed into that. I typically refer people to our food pantry network director. But yeah, we do some kind of bulk purchasing with other groups to help, you know, when we buy more together and kind of pool those dollars, it brings costs down. So, yeah.
Luke, our last question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hy-Vee and KCCI a few months ago decided they were going to solve the food problem or shortage problem. And I kind of wonder what kind of impact does Hy-Vee have on it? And they also offer us the opportunity to give 25, 35 cents every time we buy something. And then is there any real seriousness on their part to address the issue, as Diana brought up, by raising the minimum wage, by looking at the root causes of the hunger problem, and also is a recognition that if SNAP were more widely spread, that they would benefit from it, from selling groceries?
Great question that I am gonna try my best to answer. You know, Hy-Vee and other grocers do a lot of that kind of support, you know, food drives, community drives, encouraging their shoppers to donate. Hy-Vee has been one of the lead sponsors of like the Business Records Iowa Stops Hunger initiative. You know, there's a lot of corporate philanthropy, I think, that exists around anti-hunger efforts and contributing to them. You know, I think it's important to meet the need, but I'm not sure that it changes anything about the underlying issues. And so I guess what I can say is when we've had those bad SNAP bills in the past, we have not been able to get the grocers to really weigh in, at least publicly. I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes. Hy-Vee and the grocers did weigh in a couple years ago when there was a bill that would have restricted what people could purchase with their benefits. But other than that, they have, I mean, for like Summer EBT, I don't know that they have communicated with the governor's office at all. They haven't done anything publicly. I better leave it at that before I say too much.
Help me to thank Luke, please.
Thanks.
It's hard to find that line with nonpartisan nonprofits. So really appreciate you coming today and sharing all this great information and important information, but also the work that you do for DMARC and for the families in our communities. Next month in October, we have Harvey Harrison and Lori Young, who are leaders with the Just Voices organization that works on racial justice information, particularly related to the police. And they have done an intense study of the summer of 2020 and the response of police to protests and demonstrations. And so they're going to share information about that study and their work and how we can all use our voices for that. So I hope you return. Crossroads is always the third Friday of the month. Thank you for being here, and I hope you have a great weekend.